Hello, everyone. I love, like Sally said, seeing some of your faces. I recognize, I think, a couple of you from the previous session. Gainer, for example, I recognize your face. So thank you for coming back and spending your precious time with us here. Like Sally said, today's all about procrastination and perfectionism and how they're linked. And I think it's a topic that I get asked about all the time, linked in with imposter syndrome and self-sabotage and all of that. So I think it's something that is prevalent, especially for us when you're trying to run your own business, think about a business, maybe starting something else up. I think it's something to try and get your head around a little bit, which is what we're going to focus on today. So welcome and thank you for being here. So let's get started. For those who maybe haven't met me before, haven't been on the other sessions, just a little bit about me. I'm a life and wellness coach. I also design corporate well-being programs. I am a speaker and educator on all things wellness, and I specialize in things like growth, confidence, stress and anxiety, and psychological behavior change. And I'm also a postgrad student in psychology, neuroscience, and mental health. So you'll see little bits and pieces of maybe neuroscience or psychological foundations as we go through. But I think a nice fusion of this is a nice way to cover what is a vast topic. So let's get started on what we're going to cover today, which is getting really clear on what procrastination is and also the impact that it can have on you and your personal self. We're going to understand a little bit about where it comes from and why it is so common and how it relates to perfectionism and the similarities there. And then at the end, we're going to discuss some strategies that can help. So what I would recommend for you all is have a little notebook handy because sometimes in these kind of calls, you don't know what's going to come up. And if something resonates with you, scribble it down. What I would also say is don't come in trying to, think about fixing yourself or any of these issues. A lot of the time, try and use the session as a catalyst for future development because it makes it less pressure driven for yourself. You just come in open, curious, and let's see what happens. But just look out for those little moments on the call where you're like, oh my God, that's me, or oh, the penny just dropped, or something happens. I always find that you will pick up on the things that you need. You won't pick up on everything. Don't try and remember everything. Don't put yourself under pressure. Just listen out for little things that might be relevant to you right now. And like Sally said, the recording's going to be there. So if you need to come back and watch it again, then obviously you can do that too. So I want to hear a wee bit from you guys. I know you're all going to be very active in the chat, which is amazing. Just apologies in advance. I'm not going to be able to keep up with it likely, but I want to get like a general gist of what's going on for you. So first question I want to ask you all as a group is just to give us a rough idea, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you feel like you're affected by procrastination? So 1 being not so much, and 5 being very much, it impacts me greatly. I see an 8 on there, which is a lot. Yeah, quite high actually. Someone not so much, which is great, but yeah, numbers are quite high. 4, 5, couple of 2s, 5 in certain areas, not in others. That's a good observation. Yeah, perfect. And it gives you guys another idea that, you're not alone in this. It's very normal, it's very natural. It's a very common situation to feel. So that just gives me an idea of where you're at. So thank you for that. So what is procrastination? Let's dive in a little bit. So when I Googled it in the Oxford Dictionary, it doesn't give you a detailed description. It says to keep delaying something that must be done, often because it's unpleasant or boring. So I know this is the official definition, but it only really gives you a skimming of the surface. It doesn't give you really any more depth. So we're going to go a little bit deeper on this very soon. But first, I want you to take some time to reflect on a few things just personally. So, like I say, take some notes as you go or use the chat function if you want to put anything in for the others in the group as well. But first question is, how would you describe your experience of procrastination? How does it manifest for you? And this is going to be very different for everybody. So know that everybody experiences slightly differently. But how would you describe your procrastination? You also might be like, oh my God, I've never thought about this. I don't know. That's okay too. Just asking yourself the question is useful. So overwhelm, the thought of work to be done. Uh, yeah, everything must be perfect and done now. Yeah, Cassia, I get that. Distracted, draining. Yeah, not that it's boring, just too many things on the list. Yeah. So you guys will see all these comments like there's a lot of different experiences, and that's what I kind of want you to get the gist of. It doesn't look like one thing. It can look like many things. Perfectionism, fear of rejection. Yeah, I understand all that. So next thing I want you to think about is when or where does it show up the most? Because someone said in the chat it shows up in certain areas, not in others. So for example, it could be in your financial life. Maybe you're procrastinating the things that you have to get done. Or is it your work life? Is it your personal life? Is it a certain relationship, a certain person, a certain situation? Or, for some people, it's a little bit of everything. So just try and have a little think for you. How does it show up for you? All the time at work, money, dealing with banks. Yeah, I understand that one. Um, with me, it's everything. Yeah. Financials, housework, and writing. Interesting. Yeah. House chores, personal life, money. Yeah. So you can see it sometimes doesn't affect everything. It's just certain little pockets of things, just life. Yeah. Only in areas where I lack knowledge. That's interesting, Maz. We're going to come back to that in a wee bit. Hmm. I hope this helps to see the thought trains of everyone else as well. So what I want you again just to consider is, can you notice any patterns? So for example, is it always financial? Is it always things to do with the house? Is it always your career? And what you're trying to link is, oh yeah, when maybe I'm offered a new opportunity at work, I go into this kind of fear mode, which means I procrastinate. Or when I see that person, I notice that I procrastinate over maybe getting back to them, or, there'll be certain patterns of behavior. You have to dive a little bit deeper to say, what am I doing? When am I doing it? Why do I think I'm doing it? Now, again, always without pressure, because you may not know why you do it. That takes a little deeper introspection. But the first kind of stage is to understand what you're doing in the first place. So this is trying to understand your own patterns. So I wanted to show you this because I've asked this question before in big groups, and these are some of the words that people gave me. So burned out, stressed, anxious, lazy, careless, like I'll not read them all out, but perfectionist, avoiding things, overthinking, bored, overwhelmed, lacking awareness, stuck. You kind of get the gist of how the vibe of this kind of procrastination exists in your mind. So the thing to notice here is notice they're all negative descriptions. So all of us see procrastination as a negative thing, and this is our social norm. This is what we've been taught. This is what we all understand collectively. So this doesn't really help this overall kind of societal norm, because we're even more critical of ourselves then, because we know it's a negative thing. We know we're doing it, and like, oh my God, why can I not be one of those people who just gets everything done? So you feel a bit guilty. You might feel shame that you're not making the progress that you want to make. Then the cycle continues and intensifies, and you end up being really critical of yourself. So on the flip side, productivity in our society is highly encouraged. It's celebrated and accepted in some ways. And I used to be one of those people. When I lived my corporate life, I was really busy all the time. I kind of worked myself way too hard, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I celebrated that because I would take pride in telling people how busy I was. Not consciously, of course, but I suppose I seen that as a positive trait, that I was able to stay up late and get up for work the next day and work till 11 o'clock and did all this, did all these long hours and everything. And it kind of shaped this expectation of who I was becoming. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. broadly speaking, we celebrate productivity, which makes procrastination feel worse personally. So let's get really clear and take a little bit of a deeper dive into what it is. Now, let's think about that initial definition again, but give it a little bit more depth, because procrastination looks like delay, but all delay is not procrastination, because delay can be a really good thing. So you might need some time to think it through. You might need some time to do a little bit of competitor research, for example. So the main difference is it's an unnecessary delay. So it's not necessary, but you're doing it anyway. So something you're putting off, something you're avoiding. Basically, what this comes down to, it's a self-regulating, it's actually an emotional problem, not a time management problem, not a personal issue. It's not anything that, you're doing wrong, essentially. It's an emotional regulation problem. So I've got here, it's a self-regulating emotional problem resulting in unnecessary and voluntary delay. Now that's important too, because some things are delayed that you can't help. It's just the situation. It's just the way it is. But remember that it's unnecessary and voluntary. So this might be starting or completion of tasks once they're moving. But there's also another part where you also understand that that delay is going to have negative effects. So for example, if you're delaying something, you're doing some maybe competitor research, you're taking your time, you're brainstorming, you're thinking things through, that's not really procrastination, that's research. But you have to be able to identify yourself. Is it unnecessary and is it voluntary and is it going to have negative effects? Because sometimes taking that delay, doing that research, obviously that's going to have positive effects. Try and differentiate the two. Now, what you want to think about is all of the things you're procrastinating over, is it actual procrastination? You'll know yourself, you'll be pretty much on the right track, I would imagine. What you don't want to do is label something with procrastination that is not. And that might come from, pressures coming externally, or maybe you're worried about what other people think, and, all of that usual kind of pressure and expectation that comes from others and ourselves. But I really want you to focus on this idea that it's a delay which is harmful or detrimental. Harmful or detrimental. Harmful to you personally. Maybe it's holding your business growth back. Maybe you're not making that call that you should. Maybe you're afraid of putting yourself out there. You can identify those things that are harmful or detrimental. It's very common. This is also something that I think is really good to talk about in a large group like this, because we're all here, we're all talking about the same thing. We've all experienced it, I'm sure. It affects between 15 and 25% of adults, scientists reckon, very roughly. And studies have shown it can be also detrimental to your health. And I wanted to just put one slide in on this, and this is a whole other topic, of course, but I want to put this in just so that you're aware it can have health consequences too. So a lot of this research comes from Dr. Fuchsia Siros. So she's a health psychologist and professor at Durham University, and she focuses a lot on the link between procrastination and well-being and stress and chronic health issues. So she's a total expert in this field. So if you want to check out her work a little bit more on any of this stuff, I'd recommend that. But she has discovered health consequences include increased stress, poor sleep, linked to poor heart health. She's done really amazing studies on this. Increased use of maladaptive coping mechanisms. So what do you do when you feel like you're procrastinating? A decrease in perceived social support, which isn't always true, but that's how it feels to you. And a decrease in healthy behaviors. So really interesting. The effects are probably wider than any of us realized. Research has also shown that up to 94% of people who procrastinate report that it negatively affects their happiness. I can see a couple of people nodding. So you probably understand that if you're thinking about, oh my God, why can I not get this done? Why is it not happening? What's wrong with me? Why is everybody else able to do it? It can negatively affect your overall well-being and happiness. And over 70% say it significantly increases their stress levels. Things like stress and anxiety, when your thoughts start to spiral, you're kind of in this loop. It's very hard to get out of that. So I'm sure that you can all imagine how this could get out of control very quickly. So what we're going to aim to do today is think about, okay, how is it showing up for me and what can I do about it? I also wanted to highlight the difference in types of procrastination because occasional procrastination is normal. So let's think about the difference for a minute. So occasional procrastination happens now and then, especially with, unpleasant tasks, things you don't enjoy, things you don't want to do, things you're not personally interested in or understand. So a personal one for me on this is like tech. I'm just not that interested in tech. I love it. I want it to work. I appreciate it, but I don't want to do the research. So I get my husband involved and he does my tech stuff because I'm like, oh, because I procrastinate on that. I'm very aware of it. But you normally don't derail your plans or it doesn't negatively impact your life too much if it's occasional procrastination. You can bounce back with some motivation, a good morning on that topic, and you feel like, okay, I'm back on track. That's occasional procrastination, and that is completely normal, completely fine. Chronic procrastination, on the other hand, like we said, can negatively impact your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, and it has an impact on your overall well-being. So here are some of the signs of chronic procrastination. Now, again, I want you to take this all very lightly, try not to put the pressure on yourself, but if there's anything that shows up here, take a little note of it and say, maybe there's a little bit more research or work I need to do to work on this. So if it's a consistent pattern, not just occasional, if you delay most tasks, even the important ones, and you do it habitually, if it negatively impacts your well-being, like ongoing stress, increased anxiety, feelings of guilt or shame, or things like sleep problems, if you miss deadlines continually, or you find yourself saying, I'm really good under pressure, sometimes that's just something that we use as a cover up for procrastination. I can see you nodding, Gainer, to that one. Um, Often at the last minute. So if you're a last minute person, maybe something in there needs a little bit of thought as well. Also, you can feel really stuck, even though you want to act. All the logic in the world is telling you this is a great idea, do it, you've got the skills, your friends are saying, have you done it yet? And you still can seem to follow through. And also, if there's awareness, like this logically, many people know and can see their procrastination really clearly, but don't know how to change it. You're procrastinating, you feel bad about it, but you're not able to break that cycle. So just try and have a little bit of personal insight for you. Keep any notes for personal observations that might come up, and just try and ask yourself, am I chronically procrastinating, or is it just something that pops up here and then? So it's not so serious. So next, I want to focus on why we procrastinate because this is really, really interesting. So this is the big one. I think when I learned this, I was like, it was one of those the penny dropped moments. So this comes from the work of Dr. Timothy Pinchel, and he is the main researcher on this at Carleton University in Canada. So he's done loads and loads of studies. He's been studying this for a long time, definitely over 10 years. So what he says is this is an emotional issue at its core. You're not lazy. And that's really important. I want to say that again. You are not lazy. There's nothing wrong with you. What you are doing is you're avoiding a certain emotion. You're avoiding a certain emotion or a combination of emotions. But basically, what you're experiencing is a psychological avoidant coping response. So it's something that kicks in when you want to avoid a certain feeling. So that feeling might be boredom, anxiety, you might be doubting yourself, might be anger, frustration, fear, shame, uncertainty, fear of the future. There's lots of different things. but you're avoiding that feeling. You're not avoiding the task. And I was like, that makes perfect sense. You're not avoiding the task. It takes the task almost to a secondary level. The feeling is the big thing that you're avoiding. So think about it like a short-term mood plaster. You're putting a little plaster on it. You're delaying it because you want to feel better in this moment, even if it hurts you later, even if you understand it, even if it all makes sense, even if you can talk yourself around, you want to try and feel better now in this moment. So it's like a temporary relief. You know, when you get a burn and you put that cooling gel on and it heats up again eventually, it's kind of like that. The funny thing and the paradox about procrastination is you might actually become more productive in certain areas when you're procrastinating about certain things. Now, I know there'll be a lot of you who resonate with this. Have you ever found yourself, doing the washing? I need to clean under the sofa. I need those windows need cleaned, or I'm gonna do the charity shop run, or whatever it is. You'll do lots of different things, even things that you don't enjoy, despite knowing that you have to start this admin or whatever it is that you're thinking about. You might actually ironically become more productive in other areas, which is kind of the proof that you're not lazy at all. You never were. It's just that you're in this kind of avoidant response. So what I want you to think about is, so it's me trying to deal with my emotions in a little bit of a different way. So what to think about for this is, what emotion do you think you're avoiding when you procrastinate? So think about something that you're procrastinating on and think about what emotion you're avoiding. Can you identify it? So scribble it down if you can. It might be fear, it might be anxiety, it could be a little bit of self-doubt. Just take a wee minute and think about it. Also, don't worry if you can't figure this out right now because it's likely you've never really thought about it in this way. But maybe take a screenshot of the slide if that makes it easy for you, or write down the question. But what emotion are you trying to avoid? Because at some point it's going to click in and you're like, oh, that's what's going on. You kind of release yourself a little bit from the idea that, oh my God, I'm not getting stuff done. I am not achieving what I want to. And you can look at yourself slightly differently. If you also are interested in reading a little bit more about this, I would highly recommend Dr. Pinchill's book because he's known for really practical, evidence-based stuff. He is the author of what's it called? Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. That's his book, Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, where basically he emphasizes this procrastination as an emotional regulation problem. It's not time management. It's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not lazy, all of that. So what I also want to highlight for you here is it's related to anything that creates uncertainty. As humans, we don't like uncertainty in general. Things which lack structure, anything ambiguous, that can be a big one at work. If things are changing, things are ambiguous, like people really don't like that. And that's a really tough one to work through. Could be things which are frustrating or things which you don't understand. So these can be the most common triggers. So what happens is you encounter these situations, you recognize it subconsciously as an aversive task that you don't want to engage in because it will trigger the feeling of maybe feeling fearful, maybe feeling not good enough. Why do I not understand this? And then sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, you're avoiding the feeling. That's what's going on. So, something else, which is a huge topic, but I want to give you a little bit of an insight into it in this workshop, is sometimes it can be a little bit of a disconnection from yourself. So, if you are misaligned with who you are and where you're going with your belief system. So the only one I can use personally for this really is when I was in the corporate world, a lot of my job was all about profit margin and pushing things and, getting the best outcome for, the big company. And I was a bit like, oh, this just feels icky. It doesn't feel good. It didn't feel aligned with my personal values. And of course, I didn't know this at the time. I figured this all out in hindsight. But try to think about it like, are you aligned with what you're doing, where you're going, and what you believe in? Because if you're psychologically disconnected from yourself, and if you're disconnected from yourself now, you're definitely disconnected from your future self, who will suffer the consequences of you not doing it right now. If you're disconnected from yourself, the consequences don't matter so much because you're not connected to that bigger picture. Now, I want you to imagine if you're fully connected to yourself now and your future self, you're going to procrastinate less because you're more aligned with, I know exactly where I'm going. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly why I'm doing this. It all makes sense. And therefore, the action is not so scary because everything's lined up. So if there's a bit of a misalignment, just think, oh, okay, maybe I need to investigate again a little bit more. And I put a little point in here to invite you to jump forward 5 years. And if you don't take the action, how will that feel? And most people go, oh my God, that feels awful. I want to do it. I know I can do it. It's just this kind of subconscious belief system, which might be more of an indicator that you need to maybe work on your confidence or your self-belief, or sometimes just go that little bit deeper. So your little invitation here again is to think about how you can create a stronger connection to yourself in the present moment, first of all. One of the clients will sometimes say to me, oh my God, that's a scary question when I ask, who do you think you are? But actually, it's a really simple question. It's just that sometimes you feel under pressure to come up with the perfect answer. But just asking yourself, who am I? What am I all about? What do I want? Where am I going? What am I trying to create? What am I trying to do? These questions are the ones sometimes that will propel you forward and break the cycle. Another little note from a more of a brain perspective is if you think about your brain as your operating system, it doesn't like this challenge, maybe this thing that you're procrastinating on. So the limbic system, and this is the emotional reactive part of your brain, takes charge of the prefrontal cortex, which is your logical part of your brain, when you face something challenging. So you go into a little bit of fight or flight, you default to immediate comfort rather than long-term thinking. So if you're put in a difficult situation, your immediate natural biological response is to how can I keep myself safe here? So that might be retreat, it might be withdrawal, it might be I'm definitely not going to speak up here because I don't feel confident on what I'm saying. There's lots of different ways this can show up, but just know for now that that's your natural default pattern. There's also something called temporal discounting, where you will naturally discount the future rewards and consequences because you'll prefer the immediate dopamine hit right now in the task that you're doing today. So it's much easier, more comfortable, more satisfying to sit on the couch rather than, send that introduction email to someone that you're trying to introduce your new business to, for example. So this is something that you can't necessarily do a lot about, the reaction, but when you know it, you can notice your default thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. So I think we talked about it in one of the confidence workshops where, that CBT model of the cognitive model where it's an indicator that your thoughts come first, then they create the feelings, then they create your actions, and this is this kind of loop. So if you can notice what you're thinking, you can keep a little eye on what you're feeling, and then you know what behavior comes next. You'll basically get to know yourself a little bit deeper, um, a little bit more in a way that you can really see it for what it is, rather than this kind of automative pattern. So once you identify the pattern, a nice way to do this is, every time I get stressed, I XYZ. What is your pattern? Every time I get stressed, I do these certain things. I feel a certain way and I act a certain way. Then you get to know that, you see it, you start to notice it a little bit more, you increase your self-awareness, then you get to choose a different response next time. I'm stressed and I would normally do this, but actually I'm going to try something different. And that's you taking a little bit of power back over your natural system, which will always be your natural system because we're all built fundamentally the same. So you have to try and acknowledge and take a little bit of power back. So hopefully that makes sense. So your relationship with yourself is something I like to talk about. And again, we're just kind of touching the surface here, but I want to give you a little bit of an indication on how this can tie in with procrastination because it can mask deep-rooted fears in self-worth and identity. So when your value is tied to performance, tasks can become emotionally loaded. So if I were to ask you, for example, to describe yourself, what would you say? Lots of blank faces. Oh my God, that's a scary question. I know, I totally get it. And most people will be more responsive if I say, tell me what you're challenged with, tell me what you find difficult. They're like, oh, I know, I've got loads. But tell me how you would describe yourself. And that's a different question. It's ambiguous. It leaves lots of room for error. And again, we don't necessarily like that so much. So that's your challenge. If not right now, take a wee note of it, try it later. How would you describe yourself? And just notice what you write. Notice any critical thoughts that maybe jump into your mind. Often we want to kind of avoid these negative outcomes by self-protection, which ultimately manifests as procrastination and perfectionism. So it is an avoidance, if you like, of shame or criticism that comes from a perceived failure. So, and the reason I put perceived failure in there is because it might not be failure in the big picture, but you see it as a failure for you. So is your procrastination an avoidance of either of those things? So I want you to also think about this kind of concept of procrastination being a form of self-protection. If I don't finish it, I can't be judged. If I never do it, then I can't fail. And that avoidance can fuel that story. I'm not someone who can start a business. I'm not someone who can hire staff. I'm not someone who's a growth mindset. I'm not someone who can do it. I always leave everything too late. I'm not good at um, the financial side or the tech side or whatever that is. So just think about if any of this resonates. You might recognize a little something in yourself that needs a little bit more attention. And again, take it lightly. Just know that for now, that's absolutely fine. We're all on a journey of growth and development. It's just the way it is, and hopefully that's the way it is forever. But just notice little things that pop up. You can start to change the story that you're telling yourself, which ultimately is how you reprogram that subconscious, which is driving a lot of your behavior anyway. So thinking about perfectionism, which I know a lot of you will resonate with. So perfectionism, again, is about emotional regulation. So both procrastination and perfectionism are not really time or productivity problems. They're emotional regulation problems. Both are driven by things like fear and shame. So perfectionism is the fear of making mistakes or being judged or not doing it well enough or not feeling good enough. And something like imposter syndrome is maybe the fear of being exposed or not truly belonging in that role or being slightly inadequate. But both are rooted in self-worth, anxiety, that belief that your value is dependent on your performance. And it's not, of course. And again, we understand that logically, but subconsciously, it's a little bit different. So just remember this little insight, if you can, that perfectionism and imposter syndrome create emotional pressure, and that increases procrastination, burnout, ongoing stress and anxiety, and that kind of thing. So again, it's about this emotional regulation. Perfectionism isn't usually about becoming perfect or doing things exactly right. It's the fear of not being good enough in that role, in that job, and sometimes just within yourself. So fear of failure, sometimes a fear of success, criticism or judgment from other people, and not meeting expectations. And something I always notice on expectations is it can be the expectations that you put on yourself that are the highest. So you have to ask yourself, what am I trying to prove here? I wanted to include this little loop just so that you get a kind of gist of how this works. So the perfectionism procrastination loop, 5 steps. You set unrealistically high standards for yourself. This has to be perfect. I have to get it done by this time next week. I need to write that chapter. I need to send that email. I need to set up my mailing system, whatever that is. Then you can feel overwhelmed and anxious. So what if I can't do it? What if I miss the deadline? What will people think? Will I portray myself correctly? Then you avoid starting or you delay the progress. You get a little bit of temporary relief from that. Remember that short-term plaster because you delay it and you're like, oh, I'll just put that over there because I don't like the feeling. And then there's the guilt and shame and criticism that comes after that, and they get bigger. And this is the kind of danger zone. Why do I keep doing this to myself? And there's a little niggle here, which is a positive. There's someone inside of you that's fighting for you, or you wouldn't be on this call. There's someone inside of you that's fighting for you to show up and be the best that you can be and fulfill your potential and leave all the negative thoughts to the side. There's someone inside of you that's fighting for yourself. And I love that because if you weren't anxious or frustrated or, trying to get to the root of these things, then, what are you doing all this for? So think about, there's someone in there that's fighting for you. And I like that because it's a matter of growing that little fire, pour water on that little plant and grow that little idea of I'm fighting for myself here. Then that fifth step is you rush at the last minute. And if you rush at the last minute, if you're someone who puts themselves under pressure, it can reinforce that belief that, oh, clearly I'm not good enough. I've rushed again. That report isn't as good as it could be, or whatever it is. I need to be better. And then the cycle continues. So perfectionism may look like high standards and ambition on the surface, but it often hides crippling self-doubt and fear underneath. So procrastination becomes a way to delay the emotional risk of starting something that might not measure up, even when the task deeply matters. And I think that's important as well. Even when it really matters, even when you know you're good at it, that doesn't help. The logical part of the brain will never overpower the subconscious. So it has to be more of this deep-rooted, what do I believe about myself? So scientists roughly believe that about 90 to 95% of all of your behavior and actions is guided by the subconscious mind. Only 5% is conscious choice. So your logical brain will never win the argument. So it's important to understand, what do I believe about myself? Because that's what's driving my behavior. If you don't feel good enough, you will sabotage yourself, you will procrastinate, you will engage in perfectionism behaviors, and it's not conscious. Which means if you're having any kind of internal conflict, so something like, I know this would be good for me, I understand I want to do it, I'm going to be good at it, but I'm not taking the action. Normally, there's an internal belief system that needs a little bit of work. So just take a little note of that if that resonates for you. So how can we take back control? Now, we're going to run over this really quickly because I'll say it here in case I forget to say it at the end. Our next webinar is going to be more about, how can I overcome self-sabotage, which links to procrastination, imposter syndrome, all of this stuff. So we'll go into it in a lot more depth, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a head start on the information here. Ultimately, it comes down to this. You need to take power over your emotions and your emotional state to take control of procrastination because it's the emotion that is guiding your behavior. So what can you do? First thing is notice your emotions. So notice where it's coming from. So Dr. Dan Siegel, he's the guy who came up with that quite famous phrase, name it to tame it. So how does that emotion show up? Can you name it? Your emotions will ultimately guide all of your behavior until you become really good at mastering them, seeing them for what they are, and then choosing a different response. So something you can try here is, right now I'm feeling whatever that is because wherever that is. So it might be, right now I'm feeling anxious because I'm terrible at tech. Okay, I'm learning to work with tech because it's going to help my business. So you're just reframing that emotional state and working with your emotions rather than fighting it. Something else you can do is practice the pause. So there's lots of different coaches and people who talk about this pause. Some people call it the power pause, but basically you just notice it first, then you have to actively pause. Easier said than done, but you have to practice that little pause in between. Oh, I'm feeling really anxious. Okay, I'm going to just sit with that anxiety and see what this is trying to tell me. Sometimes a few minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you can manage. Just take a little pause before you do what you would normally do. You might rework a decision. You might decide not to send an email, send an email. Take another moment to consider your action. Something we'll talk about again a little bit more in the next workshop is self-compassion, because it's another huge area. And I think we've actually got in one of the later workshops more time dedicated to this in general, because it's so important for all aspects of your life. So I've condensed it here to be kind to yourself, then act. So taking a kinder stance of yourself in instances of pain or perceived failure, because people prone to procrastination tend to have a lower self-compassion threshold. But actually, self-compassion can adversely and can increase your motivation. So it's really important to try and build that up. Your critical voice is normally quite loud, quite strong, but the self-compassion voice tends to be a little bit quieter. So with the act portion, just there's another thing called the 10-minute rule, where you commit to just doing 10 minutes of that thing that you don't want to do. So you're like, I feel uncomfortable about it. I feel anxious about it. You're like, okay, I notice the feeling. I'm going to sit with it a little bit. I'm going to just start and do 10 minutes. Set a timer if that helps. Starting it is often the hardest part. What you're doing there subconsciously, you're kind of training yourself to think, oh, it's actually not as bad as I think. The resistance fades a little bit. So it lowers that kind of emotional pressure attached to it and helps you ultimately to bypass that limbic brain's fear response that we talked about earlier. Another thing you can do is break the task into smaller parts. So breaking big tasks like, I need to get on social media, I need to put myself out there. That's quite a big job. So break it into little smaller parts, something more manageable, giving you little easy wins that you can build the confidence for. And again, if you just set your timer for 5 minutes, do the smallest part. Log into one of the mail providers and just compare deals, for example. Just do something to get you started. Next thing is get clarity. So remember we said that uncertainty, ambiguity creates a lot of doubt, anxiety, and stress. So ask questions, ask lots of questions, gather information, get advice from other people. Ultimately, what you want to do is reduce the uncertainty in order to gain more clarity. The clarity will help you move forward, because remember, your brain doesn't like uncertainty so much. And the last thing is challenge yourself. Now, this is another huge, big topic, but I want to invite you to challenge yourself with what you're telling yourself. Identify what we call procrastination cognitions. So little thoughts you might have about what you're not doing, and notice how they impact you. So your thoughts, for example, increase the negative emotions if they're negative thoughts. So it creates a cycle of negativity. So things like, why didn't I start this earlier? Why can't I finish the things that I start? Why can I not be consistent? I'm such a procrastinator. I'll never reach this goal. A really powerful one I hear quite often is, I'm really letting myself down. I'm letting my family down. So you project ahead normally what the task is going to be like, but this is what you think it's going to be like. And your brain is trying to predict what will happen. So this is called effective forecasting. So we know from studies that have been done that people tend to overestimate how difficult something will be and how long it will take, and the intensity of the emotion that you'll feel. So you're so focused on that task that it makes the effect bigger. So the expectation versus the reality, it's probably not as bad as you think, or you're going to notice that you're doing it and you shrink it by just shining a little bit of a light on it. Now, here's the thing, it's a human thing. Everybody does it, because again, we're all designed primarily the same, but you have to learn how to diffuse the feeling. So think about other tasks that you're going to be doing this month, this week, this quarter, and it gives that little task some context to sit in. And other tasks, whether they're smaller or bigger, it just gives you another frame of reference and helps you kind of widen that perspective a little bit. Thinking long term. So I want you to think about your goals and your future long term. What do you really want? A very small question, but also a very giant one. What do you really want? And your invitation here is to change your perspective and connect back to your core values. Now, if you don't know what they are yet, that's okay. Just think about, yeah, I need to figure out what I really want. So I put a little example here. Talk to someone about my business idea. I'm going to grow the concept. I'm going to start really small. I'm going to maybe do something at the weekend. Then I'll develop into an alternative career, which means more freedom for myself and my family. It takes the task into this long-term perspective that ultimately you can connect back to, why are you doing this in the first place? Why are you starting this new venture, this brainstorm, this new phase of growth, whatever it is. So here's a little exercise that you can choose to do. You can take a little screenshot, or you can think about it right now, which is step 1, identify a task you've been procrastinating over or on and complete these sentences. So this came from a project that I think it was Dr. Seros at Durham University was doing, and she did this study using these 3 questions and basically found that procrastination reduces after you complete them because it forces you to connect back with your values. So statement 1, completing this will be valuable to how I see myself because. Completing this will be valuable to how others see me because. And completing this will be valuable to my personal growth because. Now, if you complete all 3, you step back, you take a little break, you come back to tomorrow. You want to always connect to your core values. And maybe this is something that you complete and you put beside your screen. You stick it on your desk, you put it next to your bedside table. You're trying to remind yourself why you're here in the first place. So I'm conscious of time, so I'll be really fast on this one. But I want you to remember that procrastination and perfectionism are human issues. You're not the first person to procrastinate, and you will not be the last. We all do it. It's just up to you to identify, is this adversely affecting me in a way that I'm not happy with? We're all, emotional people, emotional beings. But if you can master how these emotions are guiding you, you change your behavioral response. It's kind of like you get back in the driving seat of your own life and say, I understand why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'm taking back control. So hopefully that makes sense. So what's next? So number 1, you're going to get a little worksheet in email today from Sally or someone at the team. So there's little questions and reflection questions, journaling questions, things on there that can help you figure out where you're at with procrastination and perfectionism in general. So I would invite you to do that. And number 2, we're going to take a little bit more of a deeper dive into what you can do if any of this stuff is showing up for you. So that's our next workshop webinar, which is Wednesday the 21st, same time. So I think Sally is going to put the link in the chat if she hasn't already done so. Oh, there's been loads of chat. I'm so sorry I can't keep up. But it's nice for you all to connect with each other. So we'll take some questions. Sally, you have some. I'm just going to leave this on the last slide. If you want to take a little screenshot as
Yep,
well,
thank
remember.
you. That was actually a bit of a emotional roller coaster. I didn't expect to feel like that. And I think a few others mentioned that as well, saying, when you were thinking about yourself, um, and how you describe yourself, a few people say, oh, it's quite emotional. I was thinking, oh, I feel like that too. So that was brilliant. And we also had a lovely little crew in the Aberdeenshire area connecting there as well. So shout out to all our Aberdeenshire group there. I just put a shout out for any questions. I'm just trying to see in the chat if there was any questions, but I was just writing a few things along as we went along there. And I think some people were talking about not caring what other people think of you. And I think that's great, but is very difficult. So I wondered if there was any tips or anything you could give us on that, Nic.
I think Yeah, the first thing, thank you, Sally. And that's so lovely. Thank you for all your lovely comments. But what to think about as well in something like this is when things pop up, I like to think about it like just a little like light is coming on, like going, oh, I need to maybe think a little bit more about that. Just take it, try and take it lightly, notice the emotions when they come up and see how that resonates because you will notice things in days and weeks that come that go, oh yeah, I remember what they were talking about. But specifically on that one, Sally, I think you also have to remember that we are all social creatures. So we want to be liked. We want to be part of it. We want to be accepted. We want praise. We want to be part of, this social network. So it's very normal to care what people think. The trick is to care and know that you care, but you're so connected with yourself and your drive and your purpose that that becomes bigger. So it's not that I don't think you can ever really get away from the fact that you're going to care what people think. I think that's psychologically imprinted in us, so we can't ever get away from it really. But what you can do is make your own goal, ambition, driver so big that it's bigger than that. So you're like, oh, I see it, but it's okay because I know I'm on the right path. And that's related to that kind of alignment of self. When you're fully aligned, it's kind of, and you'll probably have seen people like this, they're on a mission. They don't really care too much about what people say because their vision is bigger than maybe the criticism
Oh,
or the
yeah.
comments. Does that help?
I love that. Yes, that sounds. I had another question about somebody about talking about the fear of the finance and legal aspects of the business, and I just
Hmm.
wanted to kind of loop that background to our business gateway messages on this final slide as well. If you haven't already connected with Business Gateway, we do have local offices all over Scotland. So we've put a link there. So it's bgateway.com/local offices. And if you go onto our website, that's how you get in touch with your local Business Gateway, and hopefully be able to make an appointment to talk through our business advisors are all over Scotland. And I think if you're getting stuck around the finance and legal stuff and that is not your bag, as I feel like we've got quite a lot of creative people on our call today, and Nick talking about, the tech not being our favorite thing, we do have Business Gateway advisors that you can have a talk with as well. And somebody says, yeah, that's not my bag, the finance stuff. And I think that is that kind of fear as well around finances. Somebody else put a comment that I really liked as well. Somebody from a croft, so I'm assuming they're somewhere in the Highlands, and they put, you win or you learn, both are important. And I thought that was a lovely comment too, Nick, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, because if you reframe failure as there's no such thing if you think, well, I've learned something, and then you keep going with this kind of forward propulsion. And I think that's important to always see yourself as moving forward, even if sometimes there's a perceived failure that can be flipped around to say, oh, well, I know so much more about that area then. And because, I think probably a lot of people are the same when it comes to finance or, all these tech or different aspects of the business, they're not an expert at. You don't have to be an expert at everything. It's impossible. When I started, I'm like, oh my God, I have to do social media and the marketing and emails and admin and it feels really overwhelming. But then you have to focus on, well, what am I really good at and what can I get help on for the other areas? So I had to kind of, speaking very honestly, kind of suck up what I was calling my pride at the time and ask my husband for help because I was just spending way too long trying to figure things out because I thought I should know how to do this. I'm an adult, I should be able to figure this out. But I saved hours of my life by just saying, I'm not good at this. Can you help me? And that's what Sally said. There's lots of experts at the Business Gateway office who are willing, ready to help. Please never be afraid to reach out and ask because the support is there. You see on a call like this, everybody coming together. And it's so lovely to see that, we're not in this alone. We can all support each other.